The smell of sizzling onions and fresh cilantro cut through the morning air as Sofia Delacroix wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Her faded apron, stained with years of honest work, hung loosely over her simple white t-shirt and worn jeans. At 34, she moved with the precision of someone who had spent countless hours perfecting her craft, though no one bothered to notice. Sofia's kitchen was painted in peeling letters on the side of her modest food truck, parked in the shadow of towering glass buildings that house some of Manhattan's most prestigious restaurants. The lunch rush was beginning, and she could already see the familiar faces of construction workers, taxi drivers, and office assistants who knew her tacos were worth the walk. But today would be different. Today, the culinary elite were coming to her neighborhood. The International Food Critics Association was hosting their annual conference just 3 blocks away, and whispers had spread through the restaurant community like wildfire. James Morrison, the most feared food critic in America, would be making surprise visits to local establishments. One review from him could launch a career or destroy it completely. Sofia had heard the rumors, but she didn't dare hope. Critics like Morrison didn't review food trucks run by women who looked like her. They reviewed temples of gastronomy with white tablecloths and wine lists thicker than novels. She was wrong about many things that morning, but she was especially wrong about James Morrison. "Excuse me, is this even safe to eat?" The voice was sharp, cutting through the usual lunchtime chatter like a blade through butter. Sofia looked up from the grill to see a woman in an impeccably tailored black blazer, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe chignon. Everything about her screamed money and authority. Behind her stood 2 men in equally expensive suits, their faces twisted with barely concealed disgust. "I'm sorry," Sofia asked politely, her hands never stopping their rhythmic dance across the cooking surface. The woman, who wore a golden name tag reading Victoria Ashworth, Restaurant Week Coordinator, gestured dismissively at the food truck. "This establishment, does it even have proper health permits? We have very important guests coming through this area today." One of the men beside her snorted. "Street trash serving street trash," he muttered, loud enough for everyone in line to hear. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but no one said anything. Sofia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd heard worse over the years, but it never stopped stinging. "We're fully licensed and inspected, ma'am. Would you like to see our certificates?" Victoria's laugh was like broken glass. "Certificates? Honey, I'm talking about real standards. The kind of establishments that matter. When the International Food Critics Association sends their people through here, they need to see quality, not—" She gestured vaguely at Sofia in her truck. "Whatever this is." The lunch line was growing longer, filled with working people who had exactly 30 minutes to grab something to eat before returning to their shifts. Sofia could see them checking their watches, frustration building, but Victoria and her entourage seemed oblivious to anyone but themselves. "Ma'am, I have customers waiting," Sofia said quietly, turning back to her grill. "If you're not ordering, I need to—" "Don't you dare turn your back on me," Victoria snapped, her voice rising to a pitch that made heads turn from 2 blocks away. "Do you have any idea who I am? I coordinate Restaurant Week for this entire district. I could have this rust bucket towed in 5 minutes. The second man, wearing a Rolex that probably cost more than Sofia's truck, pulled out his phone and started recording. "This is going straight to my Instagram," he announced gleefully. 40,000 followers need to see what passes for cuisine in this part of town." Sofia's hands stilled on the spatula. For a moment, the only sound was the hiss of meat on hot metal and the distant honking of traffic. When she looked up, her dark eyes held something that made Victoria take an involuntary step back. "You know what?" Sofia said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that somehow cut through all the noise of the city street. "You're right. This isn't the kind of place you're used to." She turned off the grill and walked to the service window, leaning forward slightly. The lunch crowd pressed closer, sensing something was about to happen. "This is the kind of place where a single mother works 18-hour days to pay her rent, where immigrants send money back to families they haven't seen in years, where people who work 3 jobs just to survive come to get a meal that's made with love instead of leverage." Victoria's face was reddening, but Sofia wasn't finished. "This is the kind of place where a single mother works 18-hour days to pay her rent, where immigrants send money back to families they haven't seen in years, where people who work 3 jobs just to survive come to get a meal that's made with love instead of leverage. Victoria's face was reddening, but Sofia wasn't finished. This is the kind of place where food means something more than profit margins and Instagram posts, where recipes are passed down through generations instead of stolen from magazines, where the person cooking your meal knows your name and asks about your kids. A construction worker in the line started clapping slowly, then another. Within seconds, the entire crowd had erupted in applause. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but before she could respond, a new voice cut through the commotion. "Excuse me, is this Sofia's kitchen?" Everyone turned to see a man in his 50s approaching, wearing a simple gray suit and wire-rimmed glasses. He had the kind of unremarkable appearance that would make him invisible in most crowds, but something about the way he carried himself suggested depth. "Yes, sir," Sofia replied, though she was still staring down Victoria. "What can I get for you?" The man smiled, and there was something almost sad about it. "Actually, I think the question is what you can get for me." "My name is James Morrison." Victoria's face went white. Her two companions dropped their phones. The entire lunch crowd fell silent. James Morrison. The James Morrison. The man who had closed restaurants with a single paragraph, who had made and broken more careers than anyone else in the culinary world. "Mr. Morrison," Victoria stammered, her previous arrogance evaporating like steam. "I'm Victoria Ashworth. I coordinate Restaurant Week. We've been expecting you. I can show you to some proper establishments." "Ms. Ashworth," Morrison interrupted gently, not taking his eyes off Sofia. "I've been standing across the street for 20 minutes, watching this interaction. And I have to say, I'm far more interested in what's happening here than in any restaurant you might recommend." He approached the service window, stepping around Victoria as if she were a piece of furniture. "Miss Delacroix, isn't it? I'd like to try your carnitas tacos. I understand they're quite extraordinary." Sofia blinked, wondering how he knew her name, how he knew about her signature dish. But she nodded and turned back to the grill, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. As she cooked, Morrison continued speaking, his voice carrying clearly across the silent street. "You know, I've eaten at every 3 Michelin-starred restaurant in the world. I've judged competitions in Paris, Tokyo, New York. I've watched chefs create edible sculptures that cost more than most people make in a month." Victoria and her companions hung on every word, hope flickering in their eyes. "But do you know what I've discovered in 30 years of food criticism?" Morrison asked, accepting the plate Sofia handed him. "The best food isn't always found in the fanciest kitchens. Sometimes it's found in places like this, made by people who understand that cooking is an act of love, not performance." He took a bite of the taco, closing his eyes as he chewed. The entire street held its breath. When he opened his eyes, there were actually tears in them. "Ms. Delacroix," he said quietly, "this is extraordinary. The depth of flavor, the perfect balance of spice and acid, the way the meat falls apart. This is what food is supposed to be." Sofia felt her own eyes filling, but she blinked back the tears. "Thank you, sir." Morrison turned to address the crowd, his voice stronger now. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are witnessing something rare. Authentic cuisine, prepared with skill and passion by someone who truly understands her craft." He faced Victoria, who was still standing, frozen in disbelief. "Ms. Ashworth, you mentioned that important guests would be coming through this area. Well, I'm here to tell you that you've been standing next to the most important culinary destination in this entire district, and you were too blind to see it." Victoria's face cycled through several colors before settling on a sickly green. "Mr. Morrison, I didn't realize." "Of course you didn't," Morrison replied matter-of-factly, "because you've confused expensive with excellent, prestigious with profound. You've forgotten what food is actually for." He turned back to Sofia, pulling out a business card. "Ms. Delacroix, I'd like to feature your truck in next month's review. I'm also going to recommend you to the James Beard Foundation. They should know about what you're doing here." The lunch crowd erupted again, this time in pure joy. People were hugging strangers, taking pictures, calling friends to tell them they had witnessed something incredible. But Sofia just stood there, holding the business card, trying to process what had just happened. "Sir," she said quietly, "I don't understand. How did you know my name? How did you know about the carnitas?" Morrison smiled, and this time it was warm and genuine. Miss Delacroix, I know exactly who you are. 5 years ago, you were the sous chef at Le Bernardin. Before that, you trained under Daniel Boulud. You were on track to become one of the youngest female executive chefs in New York history. Sophia's face went pale. Those were chapters of her life she thought were buried forever. But then your mother got sick, Morrison continued gently. Cancer, wasn't it? You left everything behind to take care of her, spent your savings on treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. When she passed, you had nothing left except your talent and your determination. The street was completely silent now. Even the traffic seemed to have stopped. You could have gone back, Morrison said. Any of the top restaurants would have taken you back in a heartbeat, but instead you decided to honor your mother's memory by serving the kind of food she taught you to make. The kind of food that feeds souls, not just stomachs. Sophia was crying now, not caring who saw. How do you know all this? Because, Morrison said, his own voice thick with emotion, I've been following your story for 3 years. Ever since Marcus Reyes told me about a brilliant chef who had given up everything for love. Marcus Reyes, Sophia's former mentor, the man who had taught her that cooking was about more than technique, it was about heart. She hadn't spoken to him since her mother's funeral. Marcus has been trying to get me to visit your truck for months, Morrison continued. He said you were doing something revolutionary, food that was sophisticated and accessible, technical and heartfelt. He said you were the future of American cuisine. He gestured around at the gathered crowd. Looking at this, seeing how these people react to your food, how you've created community around a humble truck, I'd say Marcus was right. Victoria, who had been standing forgotten during this exchange, suddenly lurched forward. Mr. Morrison, surely you can't be serious. This is just street food. There are Michelin-starred establishments just blocks from here. Ms. Ashworth, Morrison said, his voice cutting through her protests like a knife through warm butter. Let me explain something to you about Michelin stars. They're awarded to restaurants that demonstrate exceptional quality, innovative technique, and consistency. They have nothing to do with the price of the tablecloth or the thread count of the napkins. He gestured toward Sophia's truck. What I just experienced here displays all 3 criteria to a degree that would make most starred chefs weep with envy. The technique required to achieve that depth of flavor in a carnitas preparation is extraordinary. The innovation of serving restaurant-quality food in this format is revolutionary. And the consistency, he paused, looking at the loyal customers still gathered around. Well, these people don't come here every day because they enjoy mediocrity. Victoria's face was now the color of old concrete. But it's a food truck, she whispered, as if saying it quietly would somehow make her argument more compelling. Yes, Morrison agreed. It's a food truck run by someone who understands that the location of excellence is less important than the pursuit of it, something you clearly don't comprehend. He pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. I'm sending a message to my editor right now. Tomorrow's review will be titled, Hidden Treasures, When Greatness Comes on Wheels. I suspect Sophia's Kitchen is about to become the most famous food truck in America. The crowd erupted once more, but this time Sophia was ready for it. She had found her voice again. Mr. Morrison, she said, stepping closer to the service window, I appreciate everything you're saying, but I need you to know something. I'm not doing this for fame or recognition. I'm doing this because this is who I am now. These people. She gestured to her customers, many of whom she knew by name. They're my community. This truck, this street corner, this is where I belong. Morrison nodded slowly. I understand, and that's exactly why your story matters. You've chosen authenticity over ambition, community over conquest. In a world of celebrity chefs and television personalities, you've remained true to what cooking actually means. He took another bite of his taco, savoring it slowly. You know, I've reviewed over 3,000 restaurants in my career. I've forgotten most of them. But I will never forget this moment, this meal, this lesson in what real excellence looks like. He turned to Victoria one final time. Ms. Ashworth, I suggest you reconsider your definition of quality. Because if Restaurant Week excludes establishments like this one, you're not showcasing the best of the city's cuisine. You're showcasing only the most expensive. Victoria opened her mouth one more time, but no words came out. She simply turned and walked away, her expensive heels clicking angrily against the pavement as her companions scurried after her. Morrison finished his tacos in comfortable silence, occasionally nodding appreciatively. When he was done, he placed a $20 bill on the counter for a meal that cost $8. "Keep the change," he said. "And Miss Delacroix? That review will run on Friday. I have a feeling your quiet days are about to become a memory." He started to walk away, then turned back. "Oh, and Sofia, your mother would be proud." With that, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving Sofia standing at her service window with tears streaming down her face and a line of customers that stretched around the block. The first call came Tuesday morning, then another. By Wednesday, food bloggers were driving from New Jersey to try Sofia's carnitas. By Thursday, the line wrapped around 2 city blocks. Friday morning, when Morrison's review hit the newsstands, Sofia's phone started ringing and didn't stop. "Sofia's Kitchen," she answered on what felt like the 100th call. "Miss Delacroix? This is Sarah Chen from the Food Network. We'd like to discuss featuring you in an upcoming documentary about hidden culinary gems." "Thank you," Sofia said, watching the endless line of customers outside her window. "But I'm a little busy right now. Can I call you back?" But the calls kept coming. The Today Show wanted an interview. Anthony Bourdain's production company was interested in a feature. 3 different publishers wanted to discuss cookbook deals. And then came the call that changed everything. "Sofia, it's Marcus Reyes, her old mentor, the man who had taught her that cooking was an art form, not just a job." She hadn't heard his voice in 3 years, not since her mother's funeral, when he tried to convince her to come back to the restaurant world. "Marcus," she breathed, stepping away from the service window where her assistant Elena was handling the lunch rush. "I can't believe you called Morrison." "I've been calling him for months," Marcus laughed. "You know how stubborn he is." But when I told him about the woman who gave up a future at Le Bernardin to honor her mother's recipes, well, even his cold critic's heart melted a little. Sofia found herself crying again. It seemed like she'd done more crying in the past week than in the past 3 years combined. "Sofia, listen to me," Marcus continued, his voice turning serious. "I have an offer for you. Daniel is opening a new restaurant. Smaller than his others, more intimate. He wants to call it Heritage. The concept is elevated comfort food, dishes that tell stories, food with soul. He wants you to be the executive chef." Sofia's heart stopped. Daniel bellowed. The legend who had taught her that technique without heart was meaningless. A restaurant of her own, with her name on the door. "Marcus, she started, but he interrupted. "Before you say no, hear me out. This wouldn't be like the old days. You'd have complete creative control. The menu would be yours. And Sofia, he's offering you a percentage of ownership. You wouldn't just be working for someone else. You'd be building something for yourself." She looked out at her food truck, at the line of customers that now included construction workers standing next to food bloggers, taxi drivers chatting with culinary students. This little corner of the city had become something magical. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course. But Sofia, don't think too long. Opportunities like this." "I know," she said. "I'll call you back." She hung up and returned to the truck, but her mind was spinning. Everything she had ever wanted was being offered to her on a silver platter. Fame, recognition, financial security, respect from her peers, the chance to prove that she belonged among the culinary elite. But as she watched Elena expertly handle the grill, the young woman Sofia had been training for the past year, she realized something. She already had everything she wanted. Maybe not everything she had once thought she wanted, but everything that actually mattered. The afternoon rush was unlike anything they had ever experienced. By 3 o'clock, they had sold out of everything except chips and salsa. Sofia was about to close early when she saw a familiar figure approaching through the crowd. Victoria Ashworth was back. This time she wasn't wearing her expensive blazer. Instead, she was dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. She looked younger, less severe, almost human. "Ms. Delacroix," she said quietly, stepping up to the service window. Could I have a few minutes?" Sofia studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Elena, take a break. I'll handle this." Victoria waited until Elena had stepped away before speaking. "I came to apologize. What I said the other day, how I treated you. It was inexcusable. Yes, Sophia agreed simply. It was. Victoria flinched but continued. I read Morrison's review, and then I did some research. I found out about your background, about your mother, about what you gave up. I realized that I don't know anything about food or cooking or what really matters. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. Morrison's review, Sophia realized, but it had been read so many times the paper was wearing thin at the creases. I've read this probably 50 times, Victoria admitted. The way he describes your carnitas, the way he talks about cooking as an act of love. I never thought about food that way before. For me, it was always just about image, about status, about what looked good on Instagram. Sophia waited, saying nothing. I went to culinary school, Victoria continued, her voice getting smaller. 20 years ago, I wanted to be a chef, but somewhere along the way, I got caught up in the business side, the marketing, the appearance of things instead of the substance. I forgot why I fell in love with cooking in the first place. She looked up at Sophia with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. I want to learn. Would you, would you consider letting me work for you? I know it sounds crazy, but I want to remember what real cooking feels like. Sophia stared at her for a long moment. This was the woman who had called her street trash, who had threatened to have her truck towed, who had treated her like she was invisible. But looking at Victoria now, Sophia saw something she recognized. She saw someone who had lost their way and was desperately trying to find it again. Can you work weekends? Sophia asked finally. Victoria's face lit up like a Christmas tree. Yes, yes, absolutely. Minimum wage. You start at the bottom. Prep work, cleaning, taking out trash. No special treatment because you coordinate restaurant week. I quit that job, Victoria said quickly. Yesterday, I realized I was everything that's wrong with the food industry. Sophia considered for another moment, then made her decision. Be here Saturday at 6 a.m. Wear clothes you don't mind ruining. And Victoria, the first time you act like you're better than anyone, customer, employee, or supplier, you're gone. Thank you, Victoria whispered. You won't regret this. After Victoria left, Sophia stood alone in her truck, surrounded by the controlled chaos of a successful day. Empty containers, used prep bowls, the lingering smell of cilantro and lime. This was her world now, not the sterile perfection of a high-end restaurant kitchen, but the honest messiness of feeding people who were hungry. Her phone rang again. Marcus. Sophia, have you thought about the offer? She looked out at the street where her truck was parked. Tomorrow there would be another line of customers. Elena would arrive early to help with prep. Victoria would show up, probably terrified but determined to prove herself. The rhythm of service would begin again, the dance of cooking that she had fallen in love with all those years ago. Marcus, she said, I need you to tell Daniel something for me. What's that? Tell him I'm honored by the offer. Tell him it means more to me than he'll ever know. But tell him I already have a restaurant. It just happens to have wheels. There was silence on the other end of the line. Sophia, are you sure? This could be your chance to… To what? She interrupted gently. To prove I'm good enough? Marcus, I already know I'm good enough. My customers know it. James Morrison knows it. That's enough for me. She could hear Marcus smiling through the phone. Your mother would be proud, he said, echoing Morrison's words from days earlier. Yeah, Sophia agreed, looking at the faded photo of her mother that she kept taped to the side of her prep station. I think she would be. 6 months later, Sophia's kitchen had become a Manhattan institution. The line stretched around the block every day, food tourists mixed with loyal regulars, and Sophia had been featured on the cover of Food and Wine magazine. But despite all the attention, she had kept her promise to herself. The food remained the same, the prices stayed affordable, and the heart of what she was doing never changed. Victoria had proven herself to be one of the hardest workers Sophia had ever trained. She arrived early, stayed late, and threw herself into learning with the passion of someone making up for lost time. She was also surprisingly good with customers, her former arrogance replaced by genuine curiosity about their stories and their lives. Elena had been promoted to assistant manager and was saving money to open her own restaurant someday. Sophia was helping her develop recipes and teaching her the business side of food service. And Sophia? she was exactly where she belonged. The morning of the James Beard Award announcement, Sofia was at her usual spot at the grill when her phone started buzzing incessantly. Text after text, call after call. She ignored them all until Elena grabbed her shoulder. "Sofia, you need to answer your phone," she said, her eyes wide with excitement. Sofia wiped her hands and picked up. Marcus was practically shouting, "You won! Sofia, you won the James Beard Award for Outstanding Chef. Do you understand what this means?" Sofia looked around at her food truck, at the early morning customers already starting to line up, at Victoria carefully prepping vegetables with the precision she had learned over months of patient practice. "Yeah," she said, smiling. "It means I get to keep doing what I love." The award ceremony was everything Sofia had imagined it would be when she was young and hungry for recognition. Bright lights, famous chefs, speeches about excellence and innovation. When they called her name, she walked to the stage in the same simple black dress she had worn to her mother's funeral, carrying a small photo in her hand. "This award," she said, looking out at the audience of culinary luminaries, "belongs to everyone who has ever been told they don't belong somewhere, to every person who has chosen authenticity over ambition, community over conquest." She held up the photo of her mother. "Most of all, it belongs to Maria Delacroix, who taught me that the most important ingredient in any dish is love. She never got to see a James Beard Award ceremony, but she understood excellence better than any of us." The standing ovation lasted for 3 minutes. But the moment Sofia treasured most came the next morning, when she arrived at her truck to find a handwritten note taped to the service window. "Dear Sofia, we heard about your award on the news. We just wanted you to know that you are already our champion. Congratulations from your friends in the neighborhood. P.S. Save us some carnitas. Love, the morning regulars." Sofia carefully folded the note and put it in her apron pocket, right next to her mother's photo. Then she fired up the grill and got ready for another day of doing what she loved most: feeding people. Some stories end with the protagonist achieving everything they thought they wanted, but the best stories end with them realizing they already had everything they actually needed. Sofia's story was one of the best kind. After all, the best revenge against those who underestimate you isn't proving them wrong, it's proving them irrelevant. If this story moved you, remember that excellence isn't determined by location, price, or appearance. It's determined by passion, skill, and heart. Sometimes the most extraordinary things come from the most humble places, prepared by people who understand that true greatness is measured not in stars or dollars, but in the lives you touch and the community you build. Share this story if you believe that everyone deserves respect regardless of their circumstances, and that the best things in life often come from unexpected places. If this story moved you, remember that excellence isn't determined by location, price, or appearance. It's determined by passion, skill, and heart. Sometimes the most extraordinary things come from the most humble places, prepared by people who understand that true greatness is measured not in stars or dollars, but in the lives you touch, in the community you build. Share this story if you believe that everyone deserves respect regardless of their circumstances, and that the best things in life often come from unexpected places.